You're listening to the Topco Business Unusual Podcast. Now, the Business Unusual Podcast. Learn from the greatest minds in business today. Interviews hosted by Ralph Fletcher. Learn how to improve business, get tips from industry leaders, and be motivated by real-life experience. Topco Business Unusual.
So welcome to this week's podcast, Topco Podcast Business Unusual. Today I'm joined by Professor Mark Smith from the Stellenbosch Business School. He's a director there. Mark's been in South Africa for how long have you been here for, Mark? I can see the bike and the hat behind you, so you know you're well attuned to our territory.
Hi, nice to meet you. And I've been here I've been working at Stellenbosch Business School for just over 3 years now, and I've been actually in country because that overlapped with COVID. So I've been in country for just over 2.
Sure. And so obviously Stellenbosch offers great running and cycling terrain. So one wonders, did you get the job because of all the extramural opportunities, or was there something else that drove you to Stellenbosch and South Africa?
A number of factors. I have to say, my first ever visit to South Africa was for the job interview, and I really fell for the place. The possibilities for outdoor sports and the terrain were just fantastic, and every time you look up or out around Cape Town or Western Cape, there's just a spectacular view, a spectacular scenery. It's really that's inspiring. But then also, once I got to Stellenbosch, I knew Stellenbosch's reputation when I applied, but then also when I got there, I found really inspiring colleagues, really interesting projects that we were doing, and yeah, I fell for the place. I met my wife the same week that I came for the interview, and I say with all sincerity, I fell in love twice in the same week.
And is she South African?
She's American.
She's American. So you met her in South Africa at the time when you came for the interview?
No, I met her in France on just as I was coming to the first interview.
Oh wow, how funny is that? So 2 loves in 1 week. There you go. So I mean, there's so much to talk about, but I mean, we really want to get into the 4-day work week, because I think you've done a lot of research on that. But I mean, before we dive into that, maybe just go back a little bit about who you are and how you got here.
Okay, so my career started in the UK. So I was working in Manchester, and there I did my postgraduate studies on the labour market and particularly on European labour markets at Manchester School of Management, then Manchester Business School, particularly looking at how the dynamics of labour markets, interaction between policy and people's behaviour, leads to certain outcomes. So lots of European countries are seeking to have higher levels of employment, and I'm sure you've seen in the press concerns about aging and about not so much higher unemployment like we have here in South Africa, more lower levels of employment. So how do you get more people into work? So it started with that sort of interest in the dynamics of the labour market, and then in the early 2000s, I moved to France, and I worked in another business school called Grenoble École de Management, which is another top school in France, and continued that work, particularly focused on equality and diversity, and again with that interaction with policy, but also a bit more on the overlap with careers and flexibility and working times, work-life integration, and how that shapes people's behaviors. And then I was there for nearly 14 years or so, and then I've ended up here in South Africa because there's around the world there's a thing called the triple accredited business schools that are accredited by the Americans, the Europeans, and the UK agencies, and Manchester, Grenoble in France, and Stellenbosch are part of that elite group. So I'm as somebody's worked in that space, I was very keen to continue working in that area because it's a sign of quality, but it's also a certain familiarity. We work to very similar standards. We have similar aspirations. and a similar sense of what quality business education is all about.
So accreditations do help, eh? Just you bag the right professors if you've got the right accreditations.
I think you bag the right professors, you bag the right students, and those professors and students do the right kind of work, which is impactful. It all builds the reputation of the business school. So it's kind of a virtuous circle, and they keep you on your toes. We're fortunate in South Africa that we have 3 of the triple accredited schools for the African continent, and there are others coming along with 1 or 2 accreditations, and so keep pushing the bar upwards, because there's no room to sit back on your laurels, which I think is a good thing. We all need to keep moving and advancing. So.
Pushing ourselves. So I mean, just going back quickly, circling back, because obviously unemployment, and certainly youth unemployment in South Africa, is a big issue. I mean, is there any things that you found out with the labor research you did that you think is relevant to South Africa? That is there anything that we organizations or policyholders can do to improve employment with the current challenges we have?
Yeah, I think there are some things, and I think it's important to say that the solving unemployment levels is a demand and a supply side problem. So if you just focusing on the supply, saying, I don't know, educating people or giving them giving them incentives, or even sort of punishment if they don't find work, is only part of the story. If there are no jobs, there are no jobs. So if it's important as the 2 sides of the same coin. So private sector, but also governments need to sort of be on a dynamic of creating work. But I think I would say from experience in Europe, and actually I had a big project in Europe that was after the financial crisis with colleagues from many other European countries, where we were looking at the response to the crisis and how the crisis particularly impacted on young people. And that sort of highlights one of the challenges, that if young people join the labor market when conditions are bad, like they were in 2008-9 in Europe, with the sort of that huge recession, then those people are scarred because they haven't got that first experience. And that's what we see in South Africa, is that people come out of schools and so where do they go? Where do they need to get something, get some experience? And the employers and managers listening to your podcast will know full well that you want somebody who's educated, who can read, write, analyze, maybe do some stuff on computers, whatever it is you're looking for, maybe other technical skills if in science or IT. But then you also want people that have got a proven record of being socialized in the work environment. So we found those countries that were able to blend education with some kind of experience, they tended to ride out the crisis for young people's unemployment much more effectively than those where the young people go education and then, okay, now find a job. So there's sort of structures where people are working a bit and studying a bit, and they have that kind of integration of the two. Now that doesn't happen overnight, because you have to have a level of trust between the employer and the organizations doing that training, that they're getting the right kind of training when they're on, used to be called day release in the olden days. In fact, my mum did day release. They're like about 60
Sounds
years
like
ago.
you're in prison.
Yeah.
I got it at boarding school. That's what I got at boarding school once every 6 weeks.
You go, they come out once a week, 1 day a week, 2 days a week to work in the company, but then the rest of the week there's a level of trust and collaboration that's required. So that doesn't happen overnight. So the countries like Germany and Denmark that were good at that, they've built that up over many years. And so I've even been in South Africa a relatively short time. We often hear this sort of, oh, we'd be great if we were like as productive as the Germans, or we did great quality work like the Germans, or had the French education system. These things don't happen overnight. They take a long time. So the other European countries would like to have copied perhaps the German or the Danish system, but they cannot directly do that because people are socialized in a particular way to follow certain educational pathways, and those institutions are a bit sticky. So giving people experience, I think, is important. So the internship programs that you have in South Africa, we have here in South Africa, that starts to get to that problem a little bit. It's at the margins. In fact, at the Stellenbosch Business School, I think we have about 9 or 10 now interns in the school who are working in tech and in communications, stuff like that. So they bring a new dynamic because they're super techie, whizzy people, but we also give them exposure to a working environment, and then they can go on and find something else. So we sort of you sort of deal with that gap in their profiles. But when the economy is bad, we often find that people at the margins suffer. So that's the people who are joining the labour market with no experience, young people, maybe women trying to come back to work after they've spent time out, and other groups who are maybe on more flexible contracts, which unfortunately also tend to hit on young people as well.
So, I mean, you mentioned there, getting people used to the working environment, and how these policies don't necessarily integrate in every country. I can't help but think, and we're talking earlier about, I read books around different cultures of companies, and is it the same thing? Is it the same sort of anomaly that, a culture and a way of doing things in one company or one country doesn't necessarily relate to a different company with a different culture? Could that be true?
Yes, I think I would say that. In fact, there's a classic study by a Dutch guy called Hofstede who did these cultural studies, which still are somewhat the benchmark or the foundations of cultural research around the world, even though there are critiques of that, because he focused on one company initially, IBM. But it did show that national cultures can be overridden by organizational cultures. So when my experience at work, your experience at work, the people listening to this podcast, our experience in the office is a blend of what we experience with in terms of where we are in the world, or where we are, and even in the region. There's a different. My colleagues joke about the difference between Western Cape and Gauteng, or wherever how things might be faster in one and slower in the other. But so we have the regional and geographical differences between where we might work, but then also within organizations. Organizations have their history, and that can't necessarily be changed overnight. And maybe that history and that culture is also can be a positive thing, or it can be maybe a thing that needs to adapt and change because maybe it's not keeping up with the pace of change in the rest of the economy. But either way, it's there. And when we at the Stellenbosch Business School, I teach a class about managing culture, and if you don't manage culture, it's going to be there anyway. So you have this, you have the organizational cultures, the ways of working will establish themselves. So managers, organizations can use that as a tool, if you want. That sounds a little bit Machiavellian, but also a place that creates a nice environment to work. And a part of the proposition of the employee value proposition of the organization is a good culture to work. But whatever happens, those different pockets of culture will develop. I sometimes say, sure, you're familiar with the IT crowd or those types of series on the TV where that office is somewhat or extremely different to the rest of the organization, and I'm sure everybody is aware of. You go to the IT office or the help desk, and there's a different thing going on, different vibe going on there as there is to the accounting department or the comms department.
So, yeah. And I mean, I was saying earlier, we did the Future of HR conference last week in awards, and the theme of the conference was Culture 3.0. I mean, we're seeing that culture is becoming so important to an organization. Are you seeing the same thing? Is there evidence that's sort of backing that up? That the right culture is definitely bringing around better results or bigger impact for that organization?
I think I think the right culture sounds like there's one model. So I don't think there is one model. I think different organizations will have different cultures that will be based on the founder's character and personality, the different pathways the organization's taken, the different experiences the organization has had. I'm reading a book about one of the other universities here in Cape Town at the moment, and the trials and tribulations they're having, and the roads must fall and campaigns and protests. They changed the culture of that organization. The organization will never be the same. And so, we said of other organizations as well. They go through a particular experience. It's not a right culture, but I do think culture is always been important. It continues to be recognised that it's. I think it's that importance is being recognised by more and more people. So most successful companies will have been managing their culture for a long time through how they onboard people, through how they tell stories about the organisation, who they celebrate, who they put forward as the, sometimes we describe heroes of the organisation. Those people are the ones, that we would like other people to emulate. So many organizations have been successful in doing that, but sometimes there's a lack of coherence. So they might say, we trust everybody, we're a dynamic, innovative organization. Then you give you a rule book that's this deep, and then before you can sign off on buying a folder or a pen, you've got to sign it out of the office or whatever. So it doesn't sort of, there's an incoherence between they're saying the trust and then they go, well, they're not really showing the trust in this rule book. But the thing about that rule book, it leads to a lack of agility and a lack of autonomy among employees. And you think about where we are now in the economy. What do we expect when I go, whether it's you go and buy a coffee, or whether it's you're buying another product or another service? The person you're speaking to, you want them to answer your problem or give you that service that suits your needs right now. So I was in coffee bar yesterday with friends, and we were at somebody I was with, we wanted something, but they wanted oat milk with it, and they wanted something else with it. And I drink black coffee, so there's too many combinations for me. But they wanted all these different things, and I sort of, we asked for them, and there wasn't a set of, I've got to go and check in the rule book, see if you're allowed to have this rare combination of butterscotch with oat milk with freckles on the top, etc. Just do it, because that gives the person what they want. So if we give that agility, now that agility comes through the type of people you employ, but also through the culture, that there's a trust in that person to make the right decision. Now, if I'd asked for 5 bags of oat milk or whatever, however oat milk comes, plus a load of free coffees, then that person would also know that now that is beyond what is acceptable. So they've internalized not a rule book, but a way of dealing with situations, so that I get a good service, and without having to go up and down the hierarchy, having to consult on the rule book, etc. So that is culture in action. But that's just a small picture. It's also how the organization feels, the interactions between people, drinks on a Thursday night, all those things that the glue that holds the organization together. That's a good way to think about it.
For sure. And I mean, culture and organizational culture in different countries. I mean, I was very fascinated. Read books like From Good to Great, and read the Harvard Business Review, and I think that there's this sense, and we spoke earlier about some of the research, some of the findings, some of the best practice coming out of certainly the US, the UK, and Europe, and how organizations could learn from these sort of best practice and examples. And we obviously do awards around gender empowerment, transformation, tech, and HR. And what we've seen is that when we put up our South African organizations, a bit like the Springboks and the rest of the world, right? The most least funded team. So when we look at how South Africans compete against the rest of the world, it's almost, there's the things that we're not endowed with. So it's like we've got, sort of low schools compared to the rest of the world. Education levels is less. We've got 13 different languages. We've got low access to funding, all these sorts of things. But yet we have these organizations that absolutely thrive. Is one of the reasons you came to South Africa because you saw that there was a possible different way of looking at success than possibly the perfect sort of what we would call perfect scenario? Like the US, they've got big access to markets, they've got low funding mechanisms, they've got no shortage of skills and resources.
I came to South Africa for many reasons, but that high performing and excellence in higher education was certainly one that my particular sector, if you like, was one of those factors. And I think one thing I felt when I arrived was that, well, there was really great things going on that I kind of knew about, but we weren't singing about them enough. So we've spent the last 3 years really sort of pushing South African higher education, management education, sort of higher up the visibility stakes. Because not just to sell it, but also to say this is good, this is really good. And when we put our student now our sort of compulsory education is not perhaps up to standard of where we'd like it to be, and a lot of people fail to achieve matric and drop out, etc. But the top end of the business schools and the postgraduate education in South Africa is really very good. And I think it's something we should be proud of. So when we put students up for competitions, they win, or they come well placed. So I think it's important to have a inferiority complex about that everything is perfect in another country or in another place. And the Americans, they don't hide behind their modesty is not necessarily one of their things that we might characterize them for. And so there is a problem that I think that the stories that come out of America, it's America, it's happening in Silicon Valley, it must be great. But actually, a lot of great stuff is happening elsewhere in the world, and we would have said the same thing for Europe as well. But sometimes it's this hegemony of the American model that sort of said, well, but actually, there's good ideas are happening everywhere else. And I actually think the situation in South Africa actually helps with some of that innovation. So whereas there might be sort of access to funding might be a bit more challenging, or access to some of the a big group of educated people coming out of the sort of the compulsory sort of period of education. There's also some really great drivers for innovation and to teach other people around the world. I think so. We talk about you mentioned the 13 languages. We talk the transformation agenda, which is something that all organizations have to work with. Is our societal responsibility. Would say that we can't divorce ourselves. No organization can divorce itself from where it finds itself, and that's one of the prerogatives and challenges of South Africa. But it's also a potential strength as well. People managers who've worked in South Africa, they know about diversity. They know how to manage diversity. It's not a scary thing. It's a thing we just have to we do. It's not necessarily any less easy for that, but it isn't something. At least people are not scared to talk about it or to tackle it, because you've just got to get on and do. You go to other countries. I think that's not the case. People know it's something they got to deal with, but they're not have that level of confidence. So I think South African organizations have something to teach the rest of the world, and we as South African business schools should be welcoming people from around the world, and we do, to come and see how to manage things. But also those innovations I think occur elsewhere. One of the things. So before I even thought about coming to South Africa, my daughter, who was at high school, was doing a project on the water shortage in Cape Town, and the day zero. Now and then now you come here now, and the people have changed their behaviors. There's been a change of behavior of organizations, of consumers, but also of the management of water as a resource. And that is something that's innovation in the face of crisis, innovation in the face of a major sort of societal environmental challenge, but has put South African organizations in a somewhat unique position, right? That demonstrates what's possible, it's possible to respond to these challenges and innovate in that phase. And I think that's something we should also celebrate. And I think that's why we actually won a case competition about exactly that, where the water resilience of companies in the Western Cape. I think it's
winning one for energy.
So it's just yes, but even energy, I think is an interesting, because I'm an honorary African now. This is that we are resilient. We get round and get on with it.
Yeah.
The power goes off in Europe, and it's a crisis. It's a complete panic, and they had a bit of a wobble sometime last year, and you could see, well, they were sort of there was really how will we possibly cope, and whereas it's actually, there's a certain level of adaptability. It's a bit of a pain, but and we would all rather to have something different, but we've both shown resilience as organizations and as individuals and employees, as consumers, but also organizations innovate. So the amount of PV that's on the roof of all these buildings now is incredible. It's a transformation that's forced. It probably wasn't part of Eskom's plan, but it's a transformation of the way energy is produced in the country, and I think that's exciting. So I think our conditions and challenges that we face in South Africa are also a source of, it can be a pain as well at times. When I was trying to make coffee this morning or whatever, there was load shedding, but it was equally they can be a source of innovation and definitely a source of resilience.
So, I mean, I know we've got you on to talk about the 4-day work week. So I want to definitely go there. But before I do, I want to just talk about gender equality, because, I mean, gender equality does form part of diversity, which is around the working environment. I mean, what did you learn in your studies on gender empowerment in terms of, was there any impacts that you saw?
So yes, I spent quite a lot of my career working on gender equality, and I've often find myself as the one of the few men in the room talking about that, which I think is which maybe is something to consider. But maybe we should start there. That it's in the sense that I think it's, in terms of gender equality, I think it's everybody's problem. It's a challenge for everybody. So it's not just for women. Just like transformation is not just for people of color, the gender equality should be a problem for all of us, and a goal for all of us, because it's something that everybody can benefit from. So when I was working in Europe, and I still do a bit of it now, we were working a lot on the policies and the organizational practices that can help promote gender equality. And one of the things that happens in Europe is there's a kind of benchmarking between countries. They can see, and we see this in lesser extent in South Africa. We see what's going on in other countries, and people say, "Hey, why can't we be like country X or country Y?" In Europe, there's a kind of more direct comparison. So there was this innovation going on in the northern countries, in Sweden, Denmark, Finland, etc., where there were leave arrangements, there were possibility to work part-time in the same job, etc. They were all allowing women to have more steady careers, but also had benefits for those organizations. One of the things we were talking about earlier about in terms of talent retention, if you've got female colleagues who have to leave because they're having children, that's just a bad idea. You've invested many thousands or even millions of rands in training that person. So, well, you're going to make it hard for them during this certain period of their life. And they're going to go somewhere else, or B, they drop out, and then that investment is lost to you as an organization, but also to the economy. So this idea that gender equality can be a benefit for all of us. But it's also important. If countries make it so hard for people to have families, then they stop having families. There's some really great stuff about demography in the newspapers recently, about the challenges you face in Italy, in Spain, in Germany, in Korea, in China, in Japan. Those countries are going to grind to a halt because they don't have enough young people coming through. So it's a social responsibility for us all to think about making it easier for families to form and to have children. And that's where gender equality also benefits women. Another one where it benefits women, men, and wider society. We all need to keep a certain sustainability of the population size, but also the evolution of women's preferences and patterns also allow men to be more like modern fathers, to participate more in the lives of their children. So they can benefit from that too, because men, the sort of the gender norms that encourage women to stay at home, have children, do a lot of the domestic work, also constrain men in a way as well. That they in the past, they were looking for what we call a male breadwinner wage, where they had to find something that would pay for the whole household and some more, and maybe and etc. Now those jobs don't exist so much anymore, but there's also a high pressure and high risk of all your eggs are in one basket in terms of that one earner. Whereas if we have this sort of balanced approach, then we sort of the household risk is reduced. And we saw that during the economic crisis in Europe in another project I worked on. economic crisis in the 2008-9, where men lost their jobs first. Now, if you're a single earner household led by a man, then no earners, that's zero. Whereas if you're in a dual earning household, then quite a lot of female headed or female single earner households were formed because men were the first to lose their job during a major crisis. So the risk is somewhat different in that context. So both the long-term risk of staying attached to the labor market, you maintain your skills, you maintain your employability, the employer maintains access to those skills, but also the householder trajectory as well allows people to stay attached to the labor market. One more thing I just said about gender equality is just that, and I was in Spain 10 days ago. We were at a conference talking about this. Is one of the challenges I think we face is complacency. People say, "Oh well, look, half your class, Mark, at Stellenbosch Business School is women. It's solved. Stop going on about this. There's no problem. Half my colleagues are women. Women are outperforming men at undergraduate, postgraduate levels. It's solved. But there's a risk of complacency, even though we see a sort of level of equality, and we have these laws wherever we are, South Africa, UK, France, Europe, wherever. It's all fixed. Stop going on about it. Let's move on to the next thing. But actually, we find that gender inequality is like a moving target. As soon as something closes, for example, women on MBAs, they're approaching sort of parity with men. Something else opens up the gap in terms of executive training, the opportunities for key projects, whatever it might be. So it's a constant moving target. We did a lot of work on the pay gap, which shows that it closes up in terms of the base level of pay, but then opens up again when you look at variable pay. So there's another thing going on there, and I think most of us would think that a gap in variable pay and performance pay is probably not justified because there's nothing inherent in women colleagues being less high performing than men. It's perhaps the methods that are used to judge those things or the other processes inside the organization. So I often say to my colleagues and to students that gender inequality is like a whack-a-mole. You know that game you play with kids where the things stick up and you have to hit them down with hammers? Yeah. So you have like this. So it's just like that. Is that you close one thing and something else pops up. So you just have to be constantly vigilant.
And I mean, where do you see things changing? Because we obviously bring some big organizations together, academics, the governments. You've got the policymakers, you've got entrepreneurs, you've got women executives and big organizations. But we're probably not moving in the direction as quickly as we should be. So, I mean, what are the things that we should be focused on with gender empowerment to move the needle in a more accelerated way? Or what do organizations need to be looking at?
So I think bringing those people together is a good step, and also I think the direction of change is almost inevitable. Women are not going to stop. Thanks for the MBA, I'm going to go and be a housewife. Yeah, so it's a bit flippant about it, but that's
a good
perhaps easier to illustrate that way. Yeah. So I do think the organizations need to work with the direction of change. So looking at the way that they work, but also looking at the way they work for, not say women, just particularly for women, but for new generations that are coming through. One of the things that I have a project that finished last year about people in financial services in the United States. I had a doctoral student working there, and there were companies they couldn't get people in to come work, or they were losing people, had a retention problem. They weren't just losing women; they were losing men as well, who were looking for a better work-life balance, better integration of work and family. So I think it's actually something to demonstrate a certain modernity as an employer that listens to bring those people through, so that they retain their talent, and then allow them to take different pathways, not to have a single career trajectory that's linear. You must do this, you must do that, you must have this certain period of overseas, etc. And everybody's sort of shaped in the same way. But people will take different pathways, and that also not only allows people to take different trajectories through life, being a parent, being a carer, doing different things, but also to maybe change to drop out and do education or do some other thing at a different time, and also bring in different innovations and exposure to different ways of working. So I think thinking about the diversity in a broader sense of including more pathways in organizational careers, I think that certainly will help the larger organizations that operate what we say is like an internal labor market, where people come in at the bottom, they have to work their way up. And then for those on the organizations seeking talent from outside, is again demonstrating that that they have those interests in mind, and they have that certain level of flexibility of open to employees and future employees who have diverse interests and diverse needs, and it's part of the commitment and the proposition from employers, and something that will create engaged and committed employees, because they see there's a reason to stay with that organization. That organization is looking after me to develop but also through different stages of my own life course.
So, I mean, I listened to your inaugural lecture from last year, and one of the things that sort of stood out is that you authored or part-authored 50 different books and articles. So you're not shy of things to focus on. But right now you're focused, and you've done a lot of research on the 4-day work week. Why is that, and what have you found out?
So I have to be honest, there was a certain level of opportunism in that we were approached by 4-day week South Africa, and they were looking for an academic partner, and so as with everything in life, you have to grabbing the opportunities is a key part of having a rich and fulfilling life. I think whether that's the person you end up falling in love with, or the interesting project, or the interesting job, or the education opportunities. So but once it was there, we jumped at that chance, and we jumped at it because I think it was an important project to say that me as an honorary South African is to say, well, actually, South Africa can do this. It was a source of pride for us to be the Stellenbosch Business School, to be sort of the research partner. But I think it's also my colleagues, they were saying, well, yeah, we can do this, and we're the first in the trial, we're the first emerging economy, or first developing economy to be in that to run that out. All the rest of them had been started in New Zealand, as people are probably aware, and moved out around the world from there. But then a third reason, but my personal reason is that I've spent a lot of time working on, like we said, that gender equality, the way labor markets and organizations work, and that's sort of had time as a kind of a theme that runs through it. And that was the theme I picked on for that lecture that you described. But time is really the thing that binds us all together in terms of its scarcity. It's ticking away. You can't stock it away. You can't put it in your back pocket and spend it more later. It's ticking away. So I think it really gets to the heart of perhaps what's always been the issue when we think about work and employment, and who you work for and how you work, and how you're rewarded for that. But it's particularly important now when we think about the shortages that we might have for certain skills, the pressure that people work under, so the sense of the intensity of time, how people want to use their time inside and outside work. So we were talking about gender equality. People are not just workers; they have lives. They have bicycles to ride. They have beaches to go to. They have families to look after. So time is scarce, and if you squeeze it in one part, you're taking it away somewhere else. But we still need to be productive. So that 4-day week seemed like an exciting innovation to be part of, to study here in South Africa, given what had been going on elsewhere in the world.
And so, I mean, is this the future? I mean, we one of the speakers from last week's conference, Graham Codrington, basically showed a picture of a news clipping of Henry Ford saying it's the 40-hour work week. It was like a revolution, and that was 100 years ago. And Graham went on to say that it took 7 years of research for Henry to determine that 40 hours was at the time the most productive use of people. So some people were working 60, 70, 80 hours a week. And I think he got a lot of flack from competitors saying, please just change it. This is not good for business. But in fact, what he found, it was great for business.
Yeah, I think that's that shows in a way that shows that time is not a news story. It's always been at the heart of this discussion. I think it also shows how, in a way, it became part of Ford's value proposition as an employer to say, well, okay, come work for us, and we'll be you'll be, you get the 40-hour week on 5 days, and that competition for talent is something that also runs through a lot of the challenges that we face in the labor market. And one thing that's happening right now, and you wouldn't say that America is necessarily the country of being fluffy and thinking about looking after their employees in this way, and certainly not for Henry Ford. But we see some of the school districts in the United States now piloting or experimenting with 4 days because they're having a problem with retention. So part of one school district compared to the next one is to sort of say, well, how can we do 4 days as a way to attract people, because we can't pay them anymore because there's restrictions, or there's tax take is not sufficient. So it sort of that sort of Ford story illustrates both that competition for talent, but also the idea that it's not necessarily more hours that we need to work; it's actually how we use them, and that is at the heart of the 4-day story. Whether it's the future, I think, now that not all academics would agree on this, I think there's going to be a sort of a mix or a diversity of arrangements in the future as people work in different ways. But there's no particular reason why we should be wedded to the 40 as a particular benchmark that everybody should judge themselves against.
And should we be wedded to the 4? I mean, is the 4 better than the 5, or like, is it just an option now that it's giving employers and employees an option of separation like Henry Ford used?
Yeah, I think even the 4 we should have a level of flexibility around. So one of the things that we found in the research is that there are some organizations doing the 4-day week as we might imagine it. If I told you about it in a bar, you say, okay, well, everybody's off on a Thursday and they're off surfing on a Friday, and et cetera, et cetera. But some organizations are just saying we're not open on a Friday. Okay? Now, I would say they're the minority because most organizations need to keep their services going for more days of the week, 5, 6, even 7. And all of the organizations are working in South Africa, where the rest of the economy is working on that 5, 6, or 7. So the 4 is 4 for some people. Some people are working Monday through Thursday. Some people are working Tuesday through Friday. There's some companies are doing rotating days where you get a different day off in the week. But some of the employees in those companies are also working for 5 short days. Yeah, 5 short days suit some people, and so I think that idea of a certain level of diversity, but with you still need some standards to protect the weaker employees in the labor market, because there are some employers that might be maybe less scrupulous, or some of the lowest paid people might be exploited by very low hours jobs or long hours jobs. So certain standards might help us, but I don't think they should be so rigid that everybody must work 4. Because if everybody worked 4 and we were all off Friday, Saturday, Sunday, that would be great. But where would we all go Friday, Saturday, Sunday? We want to go to the beach and have a beer, or we want to go to we want to go and hire a bicycle or a surfboard or whatever. So that kind of flexibility and diversity, I think, is helps with us as consumers of leisure, but also in terms of rest. By working closer to 30 rather than closer to 40, we've got a bit more of a balance in our life.
Yeah, I mean, I think I saw a study, and I don't know if it was the 4-day work week, and it was shared amongst employees. So every other day, someone have a day off, and then they thought it would drive happiness and productivity, but in fact, in that organization, it didn't, because sometimes family dynamics They found a similar sort of study with letting people go on leave outside of normal holidays. And they found that the leave might be the same, but because they're not on holiday with everybody else, they can't enjoy the holiday as much with their family, friends. And so there is some work to be said for when you take these 4 days, right? And does it interrupt your other family obligations, or, you know, your friends, or social impacts?
So we didn't. I don't think we have enough people to say how to have that, to explore that in detail, because we don't have enough. There are not enough people who are in different families or the same families working all these different times. But what we do find is that people are using their spare time, either their fifth day or their time after their shorter day, to spend time with their family. So I would actually say that their interactions with family are going up, because some people say, well, on every Friday now, or every Tuesday morning, I have brunch with my mum. And obviously mums will be super happy with that idea, because they get to see their older sons, or they don't phone them, or their daughters, etc. So daughters definitely phone, but sons don't. So we find that the people are using that time to have better social interactions. Now, whether people lose out if you have if they're all off at diverse times, then I think that would be something to study in the longer term. But when the 4-day week doesn't mean that people lose their longer holiday at Christmas, for example, or in the Northern Hemisphere, longer holiday in July. It's just how we use the time across the rest of the year. And people will still, our organizations that we studied, they all started at that period in South Africa when there's quite a lot of public holidays. So those people get in those public holidays when most people are not working. And that's one of the great things about public holidays, is that they do allow for that social family cohesion when most people are not working. Even those organizations that tend to have a longer operating time, say there's often a respect for the public holiday, because that's sort of somewhat sacred.
And who were the type of organizations that were in the study? Can you share that? Are they South African purely, or are there a mix of multinationals and South African, or were there some government clients?
They're all but one was in South Africa. They're all South Africa, so they'll all be South African owned.
Yeah.
So they're no larger organizations, but we're sort of larger multinational type organizations. But we're now sort of starting a second wave on top of the 27 organizations that started the first one. We're starting the second wave, which has bigger organizations in, which will include some of that sort of that international side of things. So the organizations that were involved, there was a high sort of around a third were in this sort of professional services. I think that sort of illustrates those organizations where they have a challenge in terms of perhaps burnout, in terms of creativity and the intensity of work, as people are working online in white collar type jobs, but also there's perhaps a sort of certain innovation going on in those organizations as well. So our organizations were not representative, I would say, of the whole South African economy.
Yeah.
But we do have other service type organizations, IT organizations, some working in finance, some a couple of not for profits. So they're more, they're all covered as well. But we wouldn't like to say we were representative. And as with anything, like the first people to buy the iPhone, or there's always sort of these first movers who are more innovative. And then you get these sort of fast followers, and then you get these other people who come along behind. And I think we think about that in terms of products, but I also think we think about that in terms of workplace innovations. And right now we have at Stellenbosch Business School, we have one of the academics who works on the UK project from Cambridge University. And they said, well, actually, the first time they did the study, there's a smaller group of organizations, but then word of mouth creeps out, both by the press, by podcasts like this, by people just talking about it in the street, because somebody that knows somebody that was in it. And then we start to see in the UK, for example, we start to see some local government experimenting it with the current round. The Scottish government in the United Kingdom is actually sort of organising a kind of a more formal sort of government type level study so it's a sort of impacting policy, if you like, sort of from the ground upwards. So I think it's the only. It doesn't mean everybody's going to end up on 4-day, but I think this sort of push to say, well, the 40 is not something we have to just protect forever, because there are other options. So I think we'll see in this next phase, we'll see more organizations from diverse backgrounds.
And do you see a correlation between sort of this hybrid work versus in-office work? Is the hybrid work not really being affected by this, or is it affecting all places of work? Remote work, hybrid, and office, full office.
Yeah, I would say even without the 4-day week, hybrid is affecting everybody. So you have organizations that insist everybody comes back to the office, and there's some high profile ones like that, like you see sort of Microsoft and people and other big organizations are talking about that. But those organizations, even if they're not doing hybrid anymore, they are still impacted on it because other people are, and people saying, oh, okay, well now I've just moved to the beach, or moved down to the coast to like an hour and a half from the office. That was okay a couple of times a week, but every day, no. So then those people look for other types of jobs. We at Stellenbosch Business School, we've recruited in the recent last period. One of the questions that comes up at interview is like, so what's the hybrid working arrangement here? You know, how does it work? It's part of the landscape, even if you're a in-person organization. Now we had around a fifth of our organizations were fully in person in the study, and there was there were around a third that were fully remote. Sure. So they'd gone fully remote, but they put in place things to deal with that as an organization, but they were fully remote, and around half were hybrid. Yeah. I think that's probably not a bad reflection of a lot of things going on in South Africa and around the world, in that there's sort of that hybrid is impacting upon all of us, because our competitors, if we're fully, that's one of the options for our employees. But most organizations are working on the hybrid model. It doesn't mean they're making it work perfectly, but they're working on that basis. Now, 4-day organizations, they made sure that they had quality interactions, either online or in person, to keep the organization glued together within either the hybrid or the online, but that also needs to happen in the in-person. If we're all in person but not talking to each other, it's equally a problem for an organization.
And sort of, what was the outcome that you were seeking from the 4-day work week? Was it that you were looking at, was productivity going up? Was there bigger impact in the organization? Was the bottom line going up? Was it staff engagement, happiness? What were some of the things that you were trying to, I suppose, identify from this? And the reason I ask is because there's a saying, I can't even remember who said it: measure what matters. And so somewhere else I read an academic book, and it basically said the mere fact that you're measuring this is already going to make an impact to the bottom line, because you're measuring it and people now know what's important to you. So how do you offset these sorts of research surveys versus how it actually impacts other businesses that maybe aren't measuring it as effectively?
I think you're exactly right. There's another phrase: if it doesn't get measured, it doesn't get done. I think there's another way to say it does highlight what's important. And one of the things we did see is that organizations that are making this work, they put in place, they had a reflection on what they do, what's important, what needs to be done, what needs to be measured, and they thought about that in advance. And that's also one of the things that we learn, is that those organizations that really make it work are also those that thought about it in advance. They think about in advance what they need to do, what metrics are key, whether that's sales per client, or whether that's the number of phone calls that are made, or whether that's the amount of revenue, or for our not-for-profits, it might be the number of customers, the number of sort of clients or people that are served in the local environment, or whatever it might be. So measuring stuff is important. As a researchers at the Stellenbosch Business School, we didn't go out to find or to encourage anything, because we wanted to, which we're trying to understand what's going on. Whereas a 4-day week, or maybe more, the organization is interested in promoting it because they believe it's a good idea. I think it has many benefits, but we're trying to sort of be neutral when we can as much as we can as researchers. Yeah. So, but the bottom line is, you do see improved productivity. There are organizations where people are working fewer hours and they're doing as much or more business. So something's happening, and even the hardest working person, or the person who's most skeptical, would admit that there's some dead times in their day, and there's times when they're not being very productive, and there's meetings where they really wish they were not in those meetings, and there's emails that they really think that shouldn't be an email, or that should be something that's done by a computer for me, or by some sort of automation. And that's what happens, is it bounces, or it forces the organization to think about those things. Do we need to have an hour and a half meeting like twice a week for the team? Can it actually be once a week at 40 minutes, or even twice a week at 40 minutes? Do people stand up meetings, go to less than 10 minutes just to check in, to finding out those things. One of the interesting things I think we found is that people were using IT, and perhaps IT they already had in the organization, but was just there, and everybody was not really using it. It was metaphorically sat in the corner, not doing its job. Yeah. But people said, if we're going to do this, we need to deploy that technology more successfully. But then everybody has an interest in making that work, the employees and the managers and the owners, because they realize, well, if we get this to work, we automate the reminders that go to people to do X or Y by Friday, or whatever it might be, and it's dashboarding, so you can see where everything is. That allows us to there's not a person doing those reminders or checking up and following up everywhere, and number two, there's a continuity. If you are not working on Friday, I can quickly check on the dashboard where we are with client A or B or C or whatever, and see, okay, so Ralph got this far on Friday or Thursday. I'm going to pick up and just answer their final question on so that there's a continuity of service. So it sort of encourages people to. And that was one of the surprising things. I think it encourages a sort of innovation, but a collective innovation, because everybody's got a bit of skin in the game. If this works, we heard employees and managers saying, if we can make this work, we can continue with it. Yeah. And so whereas if I think you might be even the most engaged employee, if they're not getting anything out of it, they say they're not going to be driven to promote, really to drive forward, or to think about and problem solve how to implement the technology. That's the IT guy's problem. That's not my problem. But we sort of see it making it work. And the final thing we found, which we found in other countries, is this boost in well-being, satisfaction, people feeling less tired, better sleep patterns, less fatigued. And that was perhaps not surprising, because we find that elsewhere in the world. So even though people are working harder, they're working more intensely for the time they work, they have a period to rest and relax and do other stuff. And they do other stuff which actually invigorates them, or sort of boosts them for coming back to work on the next time they're back in the office. There's some in the report that will come out later this week. You'll see quotes from managers said people come back invigorated. They come back excited to be here. And because they've had a chunk of time off, and they're keen. Yeah. And that's I think that's an interesting stuff. But your final part of your question about how we roll out to other parts of the economy, I think that will be for those parts of the economy to decide themselves. But they'll also see it from there'll be others that will follow, and others that will say, okay, no, this is not for us right now. But they might pick up some of those things.
Yeah. I mean, at the conference, one of the speakers, Luke, spoke about you're paid to rest, and it's a similar sort of thing. It's you've got to bring your energy to work, but if you're not resting and well enough, then it's going to be hard to do your job, because you don't have the energy to do your job. I mean, we spoke before the podcast, and we spoke around the ideal sort of what's the ideal amount of time that we should be working. Henry Ford said it was 40 hours, and we stuck on that for 100 years. Where are we at now? I mean, is it the 4-day work week? Is it a certain amount of hours that we take over 5 or whatever days? What are you seeing is an ideal sort of amount of time, or the most productive for both people and employers?
I think we're a little bit early to say what is the most productive. I didn't know there was a 7 years of Henry Ford doing his research, but it could take a little bit of time before there is the most productive. But we might want to challenge in the more sort of diverse economy that we work in nowadays, and the diverse group of employees that work compared to when Henry Ford was around, is that there might not be a single optimal number that people should work, but we might want to sort of set like a sort of guide rails where we sort of where these people should ideally work a certain minimum to be engaged in the company, engaged in the organization, to be able to develop a career. Because what we find in previous research is that people work very short hours, unless you're a superstar, like a superstar podcast, you work 3 hours a week, and that's it. But people who work very short hours, they're often marginalized by their organization because they're not there enough. They're not there enough to get promoted, to be trained, etc. So it's important for inclusion, and one of the gender topic that we were discussing is how there's sort of maybe minimum, so that people can be engaged in the organization, but maybe there are also maximums. Now, previous work we did in Europe, with some of the people still working on 4-day week in Europe as well, is we asked people who will work what they would like to work, and people who work too short hours often wanted to work a bit longer, and people who work long hours were nearly always wanting to work fewer hours. And when we averaged that out, we ended up somewhere around the sort of 32, 33 mark. Now, that was about 5 or 6 years ago, I think, when we did that study. So I don't know where we might be right now, because things have changed post-COVID, perhaps. But the idea that we come down from the nearer 40 to nearer 30 as a guide price, if you like, I think is not a bad one to start. But we might all get there at different times. It might be different because between those employers that can gain the productivity more quickly, those that are paid enough in the 30 hours to be able to do that. But I think there seems to be a certain way for innovation among different organizations and employees that are pushing us towards perhaps challenging the 40.
Yeah, I mean, one of the speakers said, I'm almost 50 now. I've got 30 years of experience. I know what I'm doing. So is it about certain mature, experienced, maybe leaders needing less time to do the same amount of work? There's the old Picasso story of the woman who walks into a cafe, sees him, and asks him on a napkin to draw a dog. And then he says, "No problem, sure thing." And she says, "Thank you so much. How much is that?" And he said, $5,000, please. She said, "But that only took you 30 seconds. He said, "No, that took a lifetime." And so, are we getting to those things where we're talking around students working and needing that experience as part of their degree, that needing that extra little 8 hours to learn new things, to learn about the history, to gain the experience? It seems like it's quite a dynamic thing. But the one thing that sort of I love having academics and talking to them is because I think there's so much to learn from evidence-based research that we can adopt. But I find that we're not necessarily utilizing both universities and the evidence-based community as much as we should in business and entrepreneurship. How do we do more of that?
Oh, that's a good question. I think the responsibility that lies both sides. Now, and I don't think that all the answers rely in the universities and among university professors, because I think or whoever it might be, I think and particularly in business, there's research going on in lots of other places, whether that's consulting type organizations and research institutes as well as universities. But I think universities and academics in universities, and particularly us in business schools, we need to think about how we have an impact. How do we have an impact on a wider group of people? So there's quite a lot of pressure on business schools to publish rigorous academic research, which is a good thing. We do research which stands up against the to critique and to say and is using good sound methods, and then we can be confident about what comes out of that research. But just doing that is not enough. It's important to engage with different groups of people, different stakeholders along the way. And that includes engaging with people before. And in a way, the 4-day week's not a bad example of that, because we engaged with our colleagues in the 4-day week South Africa about this at the start of this project to work out what we could do, how we'd all interact. And so we're dealing with a live challenge rather than me going off into a corner and doing research about something that might interest me. Cycling academics, for example.
I'm there with you.
See, you and I would read that book,
but
then maybe the rest of the population wouldn't, right? So actually engaging with stakeholders to find out to pick on topics that are really super relevant is important. But then along the way, that we, as well as writing the book or the academic paper that gets to an academic conference, we also disseminate to a wider group of people. Now, that can be in the newspapers through op-ed pieces or through accessible reports. And this week, you'll see both of those things coming out from my colleagues at Stellenbosch Business School, where we've got sort of pieces coming out in the newspapers and the more sort of glossy type report. But it could also be speaking at conferences, speaking on podcasts like today. Then also perhaps sort of masterclasses or feedback sessions to those organizations that have participated in the study. So there's a sort of see the relevance and get the feedback and go, oh, well, next time it would be good if you study, like you challenged me just now about whether we need maybe to have a different and more diverse group of organizations in the next study, or we think about other aspects in terms of more blue collar workers or whatever it might be. So that constant interaction between moving out of the ivory tower of the university to talk to the wider population and stakeholders, and that's a new thing for some academics to do that, and that might sound strange because they've been encouraged to be more think about the academic side of the work and the teaching. But rather than thinking about their engagement with wider society. One of my jobs when I was director of the business school and director and dean in France as well, is to recruit a lot of academics. And one of my favorite questions at the interview is say, how would you explain what you do to your grandma, to your son or daughter, or to somebody on the train or the bus or the plane or wherever it might be? And I say, I put in quotes, a normal person. And if somebody starts saying, well, I'm particularly interested in non-parametric, stochastic, and they've lost me in the first three words, I go, whoops, stop. Okay, because it's a competence that we need to encourage our academics to have, to speak to a wider group of people, that makes universities a relevant place and a relevant source of information for the wider society and do societal good. And we're realizing that for about a decade, I think, in business schools, and it's a big shift in those accreditations as well. So there's accreditations that we talked about. Those the business schools have. They now expect us to be engaged and having an impact on society, not just writing books that not so many people read.
I think it was Tesco this week. The CEO of Tesco, 6,000 employees. If you want to reach your KPIs, every single person has to spend, I think it was 6 or 7 days on the shop floor, engaging with customers. What a delight. And I think that's the way things are going, right? It's about impact and execution, not just ideas and plans. But certainly I think the world can learn so much from academic research, and it's about how do we apply it now? How do we... And I suppose every organization, every country is different. So that's why the implementation is so important, because we all come from different backgrounds, different experiences. And so it's not all going to be a a copy paste.
No, and I think it's going to be even less of a copy paste compared to where Henry Ford was, because he had a lot of male production workers who did this more or less the same job, or sort of small components of the production process, and it was all rather standardized. And that was and that's when you could buy one car and it was going to be black. And but now
you had a choice.
How would that work in South Africa? They're all white in South Africa. So it's now we don't expect that as consumers. We don't expect that as employees, and we don't expect that as citizens. We expect to be able to have within the guide rails of society, we have a diversity of lifestyles, a diversity of families, a diversity of sexual orientation, diversity of ways we want to work, a diversity of types of contracting, and people who want to work in the organization, at home. Organizations, whether they're universities, who are as employers or as places that do research and educate people, and organizations more broadly that recruit and employ and serve customers, then we have to work with that diversity, because that's you can't put that back in the box.
For sure. Mark, it was amazing to speak to you. I think this is like highly engaging and relevant topic. But you're also moving on from the Stellenbosch University. How do people follow you? Where do they go to follow you? On LinkedIn, or is there a university that you've got in your mind yet, or what's the future for Mark?
So there's
you said Prof earlier, but you didn't like that. You said, "No, Mark."
I do like to be called Mark, but it's I worked hard to be Prof, but I also but other people work hard. Other work hard for as well. So I think it's good to be, and that's a cultural thing as well. Going back to talking about cultures, how we think about those things. So I am on LinkedIn. I also have a Substack called Work Life Careers, and I'm going to go and join yet another triple accredited business school, which is not yet public, but I think that's also part of the you talked about multinational companies and they interact with the wider global economy. I'm an honorary South African now. As South Africans and people who live and work here, we should be very, very proud of our institutions of higher education and particularly our business schools, because we play on the global stage for that. And that's those triple accredited schools that exist in South Africa are part of 1% that in the world, and it's once you've gone there as a student or as an academic or as a director or whatever, that opens doors to other places. And I think that is really exciting. We should be proud of that, because those people go somewhere else and they say, when I did this at Stellenbosch, when I did this in South Africa, and people go, oh, you do that in South Africa, and so I think I like when we do research on expatriates, we talk about expatriates as bumblebees. They fly around, they pick up pollen, they put down pollen, and they permeate and diffuse knowledge and ways of working in innovation around the world. And I hope that's what we can do with our academics as well.
Yeah, so I suppose we don't need to go and travel the world to other universities. We've got them here, right? We've got some great universities, institutions here that we should be very proud of, and encouraging our employers to look at them. It was great having you. And they do. It was great having you on the podcast, Mark. It was really awesome, and we'll be following you, and hopefully we'll get you back again when you tell us where you're moving to.
With pleasure. It's been great talking. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Mark.